My name is Ella. I'm 34 years old, once a top art student in Boston. But for the past 12 years, I've lived in an old house on the outskirts of Oregon, caring for my mother after a fall she insisted she could never recover from on her own. I gave up everything, my dreams, my career, my relationships, just to fulfill what I thought was my duty as a daughter. And then, at her 60th birthday party, in the middle of clinking glasses, flickering candles, and relatives' expectant eyes, she suddenly stood up, looked straight at me, and said, "The best birthday gift Ella could ever give me is to disappear from my life forever." The entire room froze. No one spoke. Not a single person defended me. They just stared at me as if I were a stranger in my own family. I stood there, unable to say a word, my heart shattering. What I didn't realize was that was only the beginning. Have you ever sacrificed your entire youth for family, only to be repaid with words so cruel they cut you to the core? Leave a comment if you've ever been betrayed by the very people you loved most. Hit like and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next, because right after that shock, I uncovered secrets far worse. I still remember clearly the day everything changed. That morning, I was in the university studio. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, stretching across unfinished sketches. Professor Marin had just walked in, holding an invitation from a gallery in Soho, smiling at me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Ella, they chose you. They want to exhibit 3 of your works from the series City Memories." I was stunned with joy. It felt like standing on the edge of a strong wind, ready to fly the moment I spread my arms. But less than 2 hours later, I received a phone call from my mother. Her voice trembled, breaking apart. "Ella, I fell. It's my hip. The doctor says I'll need surgery, then months to recover. You, can you come home?" I didn't think twice. I booked a train ticket that very day. I folded up my sketches, packed my brushes, closed my paint box, planning to be gone only for a few weeks. I told my professor, "Just 6 months. I'll be back." He placed a hand on my shoulder, his eyes unable to hide concern. When I returned to the gray-roofed wooden house outside Portland, my mother was lying on the sofa, her leg in a cast, though she didn't seem as helpless as I had imagined. She still had enough energy to direct me to clean every corner, cook her favorite meals, and brew her tea at exactly the temperature she liked. "There's no one else but you," she said, eyes glistening. "Only you won't abandon me." I believed her. I stayed. One winter passed, then spring. I deferred the next semester, then my scholarship expired. The gallery wrote, asking why I hadn't sent my paintings. I never replied. I thought, there will be more opportunities later. Each time I mentioned going back to Boston, my mother would shrink into herself, frown, and say in a weary tone, "My hip still hurts. The doctor says it isn't fully healed. If you go back, who will take care of me?" When I hesitated, she'd fall silent for a long while, then whisper, almost as if to herself, "Maybe it's too much to hope my daughter won't abandon me like everyone else has." I closed my sketchbook again, postponed my plans again. Time slipped through my hands like sand. Each morning I woke early to make her breakfast, picked up prescriptions, drove her to therapy. But gradually the therapy appointments became less frequent. The doctor no longer insisted. My mother walked normally, even went grocery shopping with friends. Yet I still couldn't leave. Because each time I brought up painting again, she'd smile and say, "What's the point, Ella? Art won't feed you." But I need you every single day. She never said it outright, but she made me believe I was selfish if I pursued my dream, that I was ungrateful if I left her. I slowly withdrew from friends. Texts went unanswered, calls delayed. I felt ashamed whenever they asked, "Are you back at school yet?" Eventually, there was no one left to ask. By the 3rd year, I applied for a part-time job as a librarian at the town library. It had nothing to do with art, but it gave me some money to contribute to household expenses. I deposited nearly all of my wages into our joint account, believing it was the right thing to do. My old bedroom gradually became a storage room for her excess belongings. My easels were pushed up into the attic. One day, after returning from a weekend art retreat, I found my walls painted beige. "Surprise," she chirped. "That old yellow was so outdated. This room is my reading room now." I stood in the room that had once sheltered my spirit, realizing I no longer had even a corner to call my own. Still, I didn't leave. I excused her, excused myself. She was aging. I was her only child. No one else would be there for her. I convinced myself that this sacrifice was right, noble, worthy, and I kept doing it for 12 years. Every evening, I read books aloud to her, though all I wanted was to sit and sketch. On holidays, I cooked meals for just the two of us while my friends posted photos of lively parties. I worked, came home, did laundry, scrubbed floors, brewed tea, and listened to her complain that I wasn't as attentive as before. Sometimes in the mirror, I saw a woman with slumped shoulders, hair streaked with gray, hands rough from cleaning chemicals, and eyes dulled by the monotony of days without change. I used to think if I did well enough, she would finally be satisfied, that if I stayed long enough, endured enough, she would one day say she was proud of me. But at that birthday party, with candles glowing and the cake I baked sitting on the table, my mother looked me straight in the eyes and declared, "The greatest gift Ella can give me is to disappear from my life forever." Everything inside me shattered. But I didn't cry. I didn't run. I just stood there feeling the wave of cold shock crash through me. I had lost something over those 12 years. What I didn't realize was I was about to lose even more. And what I would discover next would not only enrage me, it would completely change the way I saw the woman who gave me life. I left that house in silence, shoes barely tied, coat thrown over my shoulders. The air outside felt colder than I expected, or maybe it was just my chest burning, as if her words were still stabbing pieces into my heart. The street was eerily quiet. Street lamps cast a yellow glow over damp pavement, making everything look hazy. I walked slowly, with no destination. I only wanted to get away from the place where I had just been discarded like an expired item no longer of use. In my mind, her voice kept echoing, "Ella has done her duty. Now, leave my life." No, thank you. No embrace. Not even a glance of pity. Only a cold, brutal decree, delivered as casually as a nightly chore. I thought I was used to how she treated me, but I wasn't. Some wounds, no matter how many times inflicted, never stop cutting. When I glanced back through the living room window, the lights were still on, figures still chatting and laughing as if I had never existed in that house. As if my presence had been an unnecessary detail, neatly erased to keep the party unspoiled. Cousin Stephanie was standing next to my mother, her arm around her shoulder, smiling softly. They looked like a perfect family portrait, a portrait I had never been allowed to be part of. I walked to the park a few blocks away, the place where I used to sketch as a teenager. Sitting on the cold bench, I bent forward, pressing my hands over my face, not to hide tears, but to stifle the sobs threatening to escape. I had lived for my mother for 12 years. I stayed while friends moved on. I turned down an exhibition in New York. I never dated, never built a family, never lived a life of my own just to make sure she had someone beside her each day, and this was how she repaid me. I sat there for a long time, until the lights from my house went dark, leaving only the faint clatter of dishes being cleared in the kitchen. I stood, heading back quietly, not to talk, not to explain, just to grab a decent pair of shoes, my wallet, and my winter coat from the storage room. The front door was still unlocked. I slipped inside. The kitchen light was dim, the air smelling of wine and cake. I crossed the living room quietly. A few people lingered, their laughter dripping as though nothing had happened earlier. As I passed the dining table, Stephanie turned her head. She smiled, part sympathetic, part triumphant. "Ella, are you okay?" I paused for a single breath but said nothing. My mother sat behind her, still in her favorite armchair, sipping tea. She didn't look at me, as if I were a shadow passing through her life. I went upstairs. My room was exactly as I left it, or so it seemed. But something was wrong. The sketches I had hidden behind the bookshelf were gone. The easel in the corner had vanished. The room had been tidied, stripped of everything that belonged to me. My wallet was on the desk, beside a note written in her familiar hand. "Hope you find your own path soon." I stood still for a long time, then carefully folded the note, as if it were the final piece of evidence of everything that had just happened. When I went back downstairs, Stephanie was sorting through birthday gifts. "Where will you go?" she asked as she saw me sling my backpack over my shoulder. I hesitated. There were so many places I had once dreamed of, but now I didn't know where to begin. "I don't know," I said softly, "as long as it isn't here." As I opened the door, my mother finally spoke. She didn't turn around, just delivered a line as if it were the evening weather forecast. "Don't come back unless you plan to live properly." I looked up at the sky above the roof. A crescent moon hung faint but present, quiet in its persistence. No one saw me off. No one called after me. I left like a shadow they had always pretended not to see for 12 long years. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in a very long time, I was walking for myself. What I didn't expect was that only a few days later, I would discover my mother didn't just want me gone from her life. She had also been quietly taking things I never even knew I owned. I left home late that night, no heavy luggage, just a canvas tote, my wallet, and a small notebook where I once jotted down painting ideas. I had no plans, so I caught a bus toward downtown, where there was a small motel I remembered from an old college internship. The room was cheap and cold, but quiet. I sat in the dark, head against the window, listening to the occasional hum of passing cars. Inside me, everything was still a storm, like the humiliation at my mother's birthday party hadn't yet settled, but instead had pulled me into an invisible whirlpool, drowning what little trust I had left. The next morning, I went to the local branch of the bank where my mother and I once shared a joint account. I didn't plan anything big. Honestly, I just wanted to check the balance to see what was left. When I left home, I thought there would still be around $4,000. I had been depositing my paychecks each month from my library job, withdrawing only enough to cover her needs. The teller, a silver-haired woman named Shirley, smiled as she took my card and paperwork. She tapped on the keyboard, her eyes fixed on the screen for a few seconds, then frowned slightly. "Which account would you like to check, Miss Bennett? Your personal one or the joint account with Mrs. Marjorie?" I answered, "The joint account." Shirley stayed quiet a moment, longer, then turned the monitor toward me. "The current balance is $286. I stared, stunned. "Excuse me, what?" She tilted her head, scrolling back through the transaction list. "I can print the statement if you'd like." I nodded. The paper came out nearly the length of my arm. As I read carefully, my throat began to tighten. Over the past 11 months, there had been multiple transfers, with unfamiliar notes, card payment, furniture purchase, special healthcare service, spa retreat deposit. In total, more than $9,000. Every transfer went into another account under the name Marjorie L. Bennett. "I didn't make these transactions," I whispered, my eyes still glued to the numbers. "But this is a joint account, right?" "Yes, but each transfer carries a signature confirmation." Shirley pointed at the boxes showing electronic signatures. I looked closer. "Let me see the originals." She retrieved the paper records, showing me the receipts printed from the electronic files. The moment I saw the signature, a chill ran through me. It looked a lot like mine, but it wasn't. The letters were too rounded, the final curve stretched too long, and the first stroke leaned to the right. I had never signed that way. They resembled the style I used back in high school, before I changed it in college. I drew a deep breath. This isn't my signature. Shirley studied me for a moment, her face soft with sympathy. Cases like this aren't unusual, especially with family joint accounts. But if you're certain, we do have procedures to investigate possible fraud. I didn't reply. I just folded the stack of papers carefully and asked for a printout of my personal account as well. When she handed it over, I skimmed the page and my heart sank again. My personal savings, built over 8 years, more than $12,000, was now down to about $1,300. The withdrawals matched days when I had been busy working at the library or taking my mother to appointments. I keep my debit card at home. I hardly ever use it, I explained, feeling as if I had to defend myself. Shirley exhaled softly. I think you should speak with our financial security division or consult an attorney. Some of these transactions may be tied to identity theft. I left the bank with 2 stacks of records in my hands. The wind blew hard, tugging at the papers. I ducked into a small cafe, sat in the farthest corner, and ordered a cup of black tea. My hands shook as I turned the pages again. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the realization that the person behind it was my mother. She had everything: my account details, my signature samples, my mailing address. I had trusted her completely. I had once believed that if anyone would never betray me, it would be her. I texted an old friend in Boston, Rachel, asking if she still knew any lawyers. She replied immediately, recommending a name: Daniel Price. He specializes in family financial fraud, she wrote, and he's very discreet. I searched his name online. In an old interview, he had said, "The most painful betrayal doesn't come from strangers, but from those you once trusted with everything." I saved his number to my phone. Not because I wanted to fight, at least, not yet, but because I needed to know how much of my life my mother had already stolen without me realizing. 3 days later, I returned to the old house, not because I wanted to, but because in that cramped, cold motel room, I couldn't shake the pull of unfinished ties. I needed to retrieve a few important things: my old sketches, keepsakes, and drafts from my Boston years that I had hidden deep in a drawer. The front door opened easily. A new scent of wax and air freshener replaced the familiar mix of herbal tea and old wood. Stepping into the living room, I froze. Everything looked deliberately altered. The old couch where my father and I once watched the news had been swapped for a sleek cream sofa. The family photo above the fireplace, the only picture of the 3 of us together, me at around 10, was gone. In its place hung a large frame with the words, "Family is the greatest gift." Inside, a photo of my mother standing between Stephanie and her husband, her hand resting warmly on their shoulders. I looked closer and noticed a subtle gap where a third figure might have been my spot from the old picture. The empty space had been neatly covered by a hanging vase, so carefully placed that no outsider would realize someone had once been there. I walked slowly down the hall toward the stairs. Resting my hand on the banister, I stopped. My bedroom door now had a new lock. The lock was shiny, freshly installed. I knocked softly, hollow, unfamiliar. Tried the knob, locked. I went to the kitchen, where my mother used to keep spare keys in the sugar jar. Empty. I checked the third drawer where she kept odds and ends. Nothing but tape and scissors. A strange heaviness pressed on my chest. I opened her bedroom door, empty. She must have gone out. In her coat pocket by the door, I found a key. Alongside it, a small note. Locked Ella's room. No need to let anyone in. Signed by my mother. My hands were ice as I slid the key into the lock. The room looked intact, but it didn't feel the same. The bed had new sheets, unfamiliar patterns. The portrait I painted of my father once hung above the desk was gone. The easel was missing. The drawer where I had kept my brushes for years empty. I opened the wooden wardrobe where I had stored drafts, notebooks, unfinished sketches from college. In their place were boxes of gift wrap, birthday cards, and scented candles. Not a single trace remained to prove I had ever lived there. I sat on the bed, gripping the edge of the mattress. This emptiness wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Everything of mine, every memory, had been erased, like clutter after a party. The sound of the front door opening jolted me. High heels clicked against the stairs. It was my mother. "Ella, what are you doing here?" Her voice carried no surprise, no concern, only irritation. I stepped out of the room, meeting her eyes. "I came to get some of my things." Her gaze flicked to the open door. "That room is a storage room now. I cleared it out." "Cleared it? Then where are my paintings?" "The drafts I kept in the bottom drawer." She shrugged. "The things you didn't use, I donated. You hadn't touched them in years." The room was cluttered. I had to make it neat again. I stepped back, the pressure in my chest spreading like water overflowing. "You had no right to do that without asking me." "I have every right to clean my house," she retorted. "And if you left, like you said you would, you shouldn't come back digging around as if you still live here." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. "What about the portrait of Dad? The one I painted when I was 16, where is it?" Her eyes flickered. "Maybe I misplaced it. It's probably in storage." I said nothing. Not because I had no words left, but because in that moment I realized she no longer saw me as part of the family. She wasn't hiding it anymore. No pretense, no excuses. I walked past her, down the stairs. She didn't call after me. As I reached the door, she said one line I'll never forget. "You can blame me, but I only did what was necessary to keep order. Families need people who know their place." I turned, looking straight into her eyes. "And what if there's no place left for me?" She stayed silent, calmly turned back inside as if no question had ever been asked. I stepped out of the house, hearing the answer in the silence I never wanted to face. I was being erased from my own life, bit by bit, quietly, intentionally. And if I didn't stop it, someday I'd have nothing left to prove I had ever existed in that home. By late afternoon, I was back at the motel, still clutching the bank statements and financial records from the branch. The pages seemed to radiate cold, even though the weather was warm. I set them on the table, brewed myself a cup of black tea, and sat down, empty inside, as if I had just stepped out of a dream with no way back. I opened the files again, this time to the property documents. The savings drained, the forged signatures, those shocks were heavy enough. But what troubled me most now was the house. The house where I grew up, where I painted my first watercolor, where my father once rested his hand on my head and said, "My daughter is an artist," where my grandmother sat on the porch every afternoon reading books and brewing mint tea. The house I had given my youth to return to. I needed to know who the house really belonged to, not just in ownership, but in meaning. My grandmother passed when I was 24, just months after I left Boston to care for my mother. At the time, my mother handled the funeral, the assets, the paperwork. I stayed out of it because she told me, "That's grown-up business. You're focused on your future. Let me take care of it." Now, looking back, those words feel like a curtain that hid everything. And I was the naive one walking beneath it, blind. I opened my laptop, searched the Multnomah County property records, typed in the address. It took several minutes to find the right entry. When the page appeared, my heart skipped. The listed owner was no longer Marjorie L. Bennett and Ella M. Bennett, co-owners, as I remembered. It showed only one name, Stephanie D. Harper. I retyped the address, double-checked. Every detail matched. My name was gone. I took a screenshot, then searched the property records. The ownership changes appeared, and under the notes section was a blunt line. Transfer of property as a gift, formalized on March 12th last year. A gift? I remembered that day clearly. I had taken my mother to her routine checkup at the hospital. I sat in the hallway for nearly 2 hours while she was inside. When we got home, she said she felt tired. I made her tea and helped her rest. Documents, signatures, paperwork, none of that was ever mentioned. And now I understood why. I scrolled down, trying to find inheritance records or legal notes tied to my grandmother. Nothing was public. Then I remembered. She once had her own attorney, a man named Edwin Mahoney. He had visited our house several times when I was little, always in a pale blue striped shirt, carrying a dark leather briefcase, and speaking with the calm voice of someone telling bedtime stories. I searched his name online. His old law firm had shut down 5 years ago, but luckily I found a phone number listed as a personal contact. I called. A middle-aged male voice answered. "Hello, this is Edwin Mahoney." I hesitated. "This is Ella Bennett, granddaughter of Evelyn Margot." "I'm not sure if you remember." "Ella," he interrupted, his voice slow and steady. "You've grown. What's going on?" I inhaled. "I'm trying to look into my grandmother's will. Some things happening in the family right now make me feel like something isn't right." "You were her legal counsel, weren't you?" He stayed quiet for a few seconds. "You're correct. I drafted Evelyn's final will. But because it was filed under a high-level confidentiality request from her, I can't disclose its contents unless there's clear evidence that the distribution of her estate was unlawfully altered or concealed. What if I have proof that my mother transferred the house to someone else without going through the inheritance process?" My voice trembled. "In that case," he said slowly, "I could petition the court to unseal the will." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need to know if my grandmother ever left that property to me." Mr. Mahoney's voice softened. "She loved you very much. You were always the one she trusted. But Ella, if there's truly forgery or inheritance violations, you'll need legal support. You can't fight a system of carefully arranged paperwork on your own," I whispered. "I already have someone, a lawyer named Daniel Price." "Oh," he sounded mildly surprised. "Daniel is excellent. If he's involved, I'll cooperate." I thanked him and hung up. My head felt like a maze, pieces beginning to fall into place. Every word my mother had spoken, every delay in showing me documents after my grandmother died, every evasive look when I asked about the estate, it was all becoming clear. Maybe, from the moment I left Boston to return home, everything had been part of a quiet plan. A plan to make me give up, to abandon my dreams, to stay in that house like a shadow. And in the end, once I had withdrawn from my own life, everything that belonged to me would vanish too, as if I had never existed in the family's legacy. That afternoon, I returned to the old house, not to confront anyone, but just to pass by. I didn't even know why I did it. Maybe only to look again at the place that once meant the world to me, the house I thought was mine, until I saw my name erased from every record. The house stood still in the sun, the roof tiles still gray like the winters when I used to paint on the porch. The porch was now painted white, my grandmother's old flower pots replaced with plastic plants. Everything was familiar yet foreign. I was about to leave when the side gate opened. Mrs. Whitaker, the neighbor across the street, stepped out, carrying a paper bag and a small trash basket. She looked the same, tall frame, silver hair tied neatly back, her steps slow but steady. Her eyes met mine, pausing a moment before. She nodded. I nodded back, intending to walk faster to avoid conversation. "Ella," her voice was soft, but something in it made me stop. I turned. She stepped closer, glanced quickly up and down the street, then lowered her voice. Could you come over for a moment? There's something important I need to give you. I hesitated but nodded. Her house was quiet, scented with cinnamon and old wood. She led me into the living room, where the late afternoon light slanted through the window. She set a teacup in front of me, then went to the old bookshelf. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled out a hidden compartment at the bottom. I once promised Evelyn I would give this to you, but not too early, only when I felt things had gone too far. She pulled out a thick, sealed brown envelope. On the front was my grandmother's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. It said simply, "For Ella, read when you doubt everything." I clutched the envelope, my throat tightening. "Why did you keep it?" I asked. "Because Evelyn didn't trust your mother," she said plainly. She was clear. If Marjorie tried to hide the will, tried to cut you out of the inheritance, this letter was part of her backup plan. Evelyn prepared more carefully than you think. I opened the letter. The paper had yellowed, but the writing was bold. "My dear Ella, if you are reading this, it means you've seen the truth I hoped you'd never have to face. I left the house to you. Only you. Not because you're the most talented, but because you are the one who will keep this home true to its meaning, a place to live, to remember, to love. I have stored the official will in a safety deposit box at Mountain View Federal Credit Union, Branch 3, under joint registration with you. The code is my birth date plus the last 4 digits of the house number. Go there. And if your mother or anyone else says I left you nothing, let them read what I signed with my own hand." I folded the letter, my hands cold as if I had just stepped out of an old dream. She had prepared for this all along, and I had been trapped in the illusion of fulfilling duty for too long. "When did she ask you to deliver this?" I asked quietly. "Before Evelyn was admitted to the hospital that year," Mrs. Whitaker replied. She said, "Marjorie won't stop at exploiting kindness. If she thinks she can control Ella through guilt, she will, and she'll do worse." I looked out the window. The evening shadows stretched across the trees. What I felt wasn't anger, but a painful awakening. For years, I had lived in that house, preparing meals, managing medicine, enduring every change of season, while my name was being erased from every document. I took out my notebook and copied the code written in the letter. My grandmother's birthday, August 17th, plus the house number 1629. So the code was 1708169. "You've kept this letter for 10 years?" I asked softly. "Yes. Evelyn said you would need it the moment you felt you were disappearing from your own life." I sat there for a long while. She said nothing more, only poured more tea. Her calm gestures gave me a rare sense of safety and trust, something I hadn't felt in my mother's house for years. Before I left, she handed me another slip of paper. "The business card of someone you can contact at Mountain View Bank. Her name is Lydia Cole. She was Evelyn's close friend." I took it, nodding my thanks. At the door, she stopped me. "Ella," she said, looking straight into my eyes, "you're not crazy, not disrespectful, not ungrateful. You're just stepping out of someone else's shadow." I said nothing. I only gripped my grandmother's letter like someone holding the only map back to themselves. And this time, I wasn't walking out of duty, fear, or the need for approval. I was walking for the truth, for the voice of someone who always believed I deserved to choose my own path. The next morning, I took the early bus to Mountain View Bank. In my bag were my grandmother's letter, the documents I had gathered, and the card with Lydia Cole's name, the woman Mrs. Whitaker said had been close to Evelyn. Branch 3 stood on an old street, its stone facade lined with maple trees. I stepped inside, my chest heavy with a cold, solid weight. At the customer service desk, 3 employees were talking, and within minutes, a petite woman in her 50s with neatly pinned silver hair approached me. "Miss Ella Bennett?" I nodded. I'm Lydia. Please, come with me. Her office was tucked in a corner, frosted glass door, a daffodil print hanging behind her chair. Once the door closed, she handed me a cup of hot tea, cinnamon-scented steam calming me slightly. I went to school with your mother, she said slowly. But Evelyn, your grandmother, was the one I truly respected. I nodded. I need to open the safety deposit box registered jointly with me and Evelyn Margot. I have the code and confirmation here. I handed her the letter along with my ID copies. Lydia carefully checked them, then stood. Follow me. Box number 407 was stored in the secure vault downstairs. After entering the code, scanning my fingerprint, and passing 3 layers of verification, she opened the steel door. A metal box slid out. She placed it on the table, pushing it toward me. You can look at it privately. Ring the bell when you're ready. I sat, resting my hands on the lid. I opened it. Inside was another thick envelope, sealed and notarized. A file stamped in red, legal will, enforceable under Oregon law. At the bottom lay my grandmother's leather-bound journal and a silver bracelet I thought had been lost years ago. I quickly turned to the first page of the will. The printed words were clear. I, Evelyn Margot, being of sound mind, hereby designate that all real estate and financial assets be transferred to my sole granddaughter, Ella Margaret Bennett. No exceptions, no co-owners. 3 signatures. Hers, 2 witnesses, a notary. My mother's name was nowhere. I made a copy, placed it carefully into a paper envelope, and rang for Lydia. She studied me for a long moment, then placed her hand on my shoulder. My dear, Evelyn always feared this would happen. She once said, if I'm gone, Ella won't have anyone to protect her. So I must protect her now. Those words echoed in my head as I left the bank. I went straight back to the motel, spent the entire afternoon scanning the documents. I called attorney Daniel Price, arranging to meet at his private office downtown the next morning. On the phone, his voice was steady. We already have plenty to start with. I thought I would have one quiet night, but close to 8 p.m., my phone rang. It was Aunt Ruth, my mother's cousin from Spokane. Ella, her voice faltered. Your mother called everyone in the family. She said, you've been acting unstable, forgetting things, causing trouble, yelling at neighbors, breaking things in the house. I shot to my feet. Do you believe that? I don't, but some of them do. They're messaging each other, planning some sort of intervention. They think you need treatment. Someone even mentioned admitting you for a psychiatric evaluation. I found it almost laughable, yet I couldn't bring myself to laugh. Aunt Ruth went on. Your mother also said you dropped out of school because of mental health problems, and that she had to support you for 12 years because she feared you couldn't live on your own. I couldn't get a word out. Ella, Aunt Ruth said gently, if you need help, I'll stand as a witness. I've never once seen you behave the way your mother describes. But you need to act before this gets out of hand. I hung up and sat still in the dark. The streetlight spilled through the window, dull and distant. In my mind, my mother's words echoed, don't come back unless you intend to live properly. Yes, because to her, living properly meant silence, obedience, and letting her decide everything. I opened my laptop and emailed Daniel all the copies of the property files, financial records, and my grandmother's will. I added clear notes marking the timeline. When I finished, I sat upright. I didn't feel fear, only a cold resolve running through my spine. If my mother wanted to paint me as insane in everyone's eyes, I would show her how sharp sanity can be when guided by proof. And I wasn't only going to defend my name. I would reclaim the life she had distorted for 12 years, not with tears, but with the one thing she couldn't control, the truth. The morning of the so-called intervention unfolded in an unsettling quiet. I woke before dawn, brewed a cup of black coffee but didn't drink it, only held it to warm my hands. On the table was the case file Daniel and I had prepared: bank statements, transfer receipts, forged signatures, credit contracts opened in my name that I never signed, the notarized copy of Evelyn's will, and her handwritten letter. Daniel picked me up right on time, dressed neatly in a gray suit, his leather briefcase resting on the passenger seat. When I got in, he said only one short line: "No need for speeches. Let the documents talk." We parked outside June's house, the chosen venue for this so-called family mediation. Cars already lined the curb: Lucas's, Aunt Ruth's, Stephanie's, and a few others. Through the window, I caught sight of my mother, posture upright, hand resting on the chair arm like she was preparing to address a council. June opened the door when I rang the bell. She looked surprised to see me arrive with Daniel and Mrs. Whitaker. "You actually came?" she whispered, a flicker of worry in her eyes. "I didn't come alone," I said evenly. Inside, the living room air felt thick. My mother sat in the center, a tissue in hand, eyes slightly red as if she had just been crying. Stephanie was next to her, gaze slanted, studying me. Lucas stood by the window, hands shoved in his pockets. The rest of the relatives were scattered around, their looks a mix of curiosity and doubt. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and set the folder on the table. "Shall we begin?" my mother asked, her voice soft but carrying that familiar edge of control. "Ella, we're all here because we care about you. Lately you've had troubling behavior. Forgetfulness, irritability, and what seems like delusions about money and the ownership of the house." I didn't respond to her. I gave Daniel a small nod. He opened the folder, drew out the documents, and spoke with clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Daniel Price, legal representative for Miss Ella Bennett. What I'm about to present is not intended to insult anyone, but to clarify matters of finance, property, and personal reputation that my client has the full legal right to protect." He laid down the joint account statements, then shifted to the bank transfer receipts. "These are transfers totaling more than $9,000, taken from the joint account to which Miss Bennett contributed the majority of funds. Each transaction was authorized with a signature that is not hers. The bank has confirmed the signatures show signs of forgery." Whispers rippled across the room. My mother stayed silent, lips pressed thin. Daniel pressed on, presenting the next set of records. "These are credit accounts opened under Miss Bennett's name, with current debt exceeding $15,000. She never applied for any of these cards. Here we have evidence of spending luxury spas, jewelry, restaurants, all within the residential area of Mrs. Marjorie Bennett." I glanced at Stephanie. She straightened, her face tense. Clearly, she hadn't known about these debts. Then Daniel placed my grandmother's handwritten letter on the table, handling it like something fragile and precious. "This is a personal letter from Evelyn Margot, Ella's grandmother, alongside the sealed and notarized will stored in Mountain View Bank's vault. It confirms that she left the entire property at 1629 Woodhaven Drive solely to Ella. No co-heirs. No other names." Lucas frowned. "Hold on. Stephanie's been living there. Didn't Marjorie transfer the deed to her?" Daniel nodded. "Correct, Mrs. Marjorie transferred ownership under the guise of a gift, bypassing any formal will procedure. We are preparing a case to restore legal ownership based on the valid will." Still, my mother said nothing. She sat, gripping her tissue tightly. I raised my head, scanning the room. "You all believed my mother, that she cared for me for 12 years, that I was weak, unstable, dependent on her. But for those 12 years I worked, I paid bills, I managed her health care, I turned down art opportunities, abandoned friends, and lost myself." My mother shot up. "You're humiliating me in front of the family." "I'm not humiliating you," I said slowly. I'm giving back what you tried to erase. Evidence. And truth. Stephanie leaned toward her, whispering, "You said the house was yours. You told me I was the rightful heir. You never mentioned Aunt Evelyn." My mother's eyes flickered, shaken. Lucas stepped closer, taking the will copy, flipping through the pages. "Notary signatures are right here. Bank vault records, too." "Marjorie, why didn't you say anything when Evelyn passed? Why hide the paperwork?" "'Cause I was afraid," my mother murmured, voice breaking. "Afraid that if Ella had everything, she'd leave. The house would feel empty. I've lost too much already." I locked eyes with her. "No one took the house from you. You gave it away along with my trust." Mrs. Whitaker, seated in the corner, finally spoke. "I witnessed Evelyn sign that will. She did it out of love for Ella. And I also watched Marjorie change, little by little, after Evelyn passed." No one else spoke. The room fell silent. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because what needed to be heard had been laid out so clearly that no one could deny it. Excuses, pity, and justifications lost their weight. All that remained was the heavy realization for those who once thought I was the one out of control. They were beginning to see the one controlling my entire life was my mother. No one broke the silence after I finished. Time itself seemed to stall. Every gaze fell on my mother, who stood hunched now, her hands gripping the tablecloth, her back bowed as if the weight of 12 years of secrets had finally crashed down. I heard Daniel's pen click as he opened another file. The air shifted as he spoke in a measured tone. "We have one more detail to clarify, something that may explain why Ella was kept dependent for more than a decade." He laid out a hospital record from Street Charles, dated April 2013. Patient: Marjorie L. Bennett. Left hip injury. He pointed at the doctor's notes. Diagnosis: soft tissue hematoma. No fractures, no joint damage. Recommended rest 3 to 5 days, after which patient may walk lightly. A roaring sound filled my ears. Lucas scowled. "Wait, you told us you broke your hip. You said the doctor forbade you from moving for 3 months." Stephanie turned to her, disbelief all over her face. My mother said nothing. She dabbed her temples with a tissue, then collapsed into the chair, as if her legs couldn't hold her. I moved closer to Daniel, eyes locked on the cold lines of the medical report. Those words shattered the core of the story my mother had built. The story I had believed so fully that I imprisoned myself in that house for 12 years. "So, there was no fracture?" My voice rasped, dry as dust. Daniel nodded. "I spoke with her former physician, who still practices at the orthopedic center. He confirmed there was no surgery, no casting, and no prescription requiring long-term care from family." Memories slammed into me. That first night back from Boston, my mother sprawled on the couch, grimacing, her breathing shallow. I had believed it all. I canceled my final semester, refused the Soho exhibition, turned down Professor Marin's invitation because of one shaky phone call. "Ella, I can't walk anymore. You're all I have." Now, staring at the scan showing no fracture, it felt like my entire youth was scattering in shards at my feet. Stephanie jumped to her feet. "You told me you couldn't even shop for 2 years. I drove every weekend, bought groceries, cleaned, cooked. You even made me take 3 weeks off work one summer to care for you. Was that all a lie?" Still, my mother stayed silent. Lucas stepped forward, his tone no longer harsh but weary. "You created an entire story to keep Ella trapped? For 12 years? Why?" My mother turned her head away, but I refused to let her escape another second. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice steady now. What explanation could possibly justify this? At last, she spoke. "I was afraid you'd leave like your father. After Evelyn passed, the house felt too empty. I couldn't live alone. And you were the only one left." "You didn't lose anyone," I said. You pushed them away. And you didn't keep me out of love. You kept me because I could work, sacrifice, and serve. I was your temporary solution. And when you no longer needed me, you threw me aside like something used up. She flinched, but tried to steady her tone. I never thought you'd stay so long. I thought you'd leave sooner. But you stayed, and I got used to having someone there. I looked at her, and in that moment, anger slipped away. All I saw was a woman who had never learned how to love anyone but herself. June, who had been silent all along, finally spoke. I think that's enough. Everyone here has the right to decide their own life. And Ella, you don't have anything left to prove. Lucas turned to me slowly. If you need someone to testify for any legal process, I'll do it. Stephanie said nothing, but her eyes softened. She gave a tiny nod, like a quiet apology. I stood tall, the late afternoon light spilling across the table, coating the documents in a gentle golden hue. My youth was stolen, not through violence, but through a lie repeated long enough to become the truth in everyone's eyes. Yet the truth, it was always there, waiting to be revealed. No one objected. No one defended. In that room, for the first time in 12 years, I was no longer the daughter forced to explain herself. I was the survivor who had walked out of a story I once thought was my duty. Now I saw it clearly. It had only been a trap, dressed up as family love and sacrifice, and I had stepped out of it on my own 2 feet. 4 months after that family intervention ended, I officially won the case. The court declared forging signatures, transferring property illegally, and using credit accounts under someone else's name by Marjorie Bennett amounted to financial abuse within the family. Evelyn's will was confirmed valid, without dispute. Full ownership of the house at 1629 Woodhaven Drive was restored entirely to me. The day I signed my name on the new ownership papers, Daniel sat beside me, handing me the pen as though it were a ritual returning a part of my life that had been stolen. He didn't say much, only nodded when I set the pen down. From the notary's window, the afternoon sun streamed through the thin curtains, casting a faint golden dust over the papers. Marjorie wasn't present in court that day. She delegated to a local attorney, quietly accepting the judgment. In the weeks after, I heard she moved out in a single day. An old moving truck parked out front, and she and 2 unfamiliar women carried a few boxes. No one came to see her off. No neighbor waved goodbye. A street that had once listened to her complaints about her unstable daughter now turned its back in silence, like fog lifting at sunrise. I didn't feel triumphant, I just felt empty. Some wounds can't be measured in wins or losses in a courtroom. They don't show up in rulings, and they don't vanish when the person who caused them disappears from your life. I returned to that house, my grandmother's house, my house. Every morning I began by opening all the windows. I stripped down the heavy beige-gray curtains my mother had chosen, replacing them with sheer white fabric. I cleared the dust from the attic, uncovering old paintings tossed aside, their wooden frames chipped, colors smeared, yet still alive with their original emotion. Sketches I thought were lost lay tucked inside a trunk beneath the stairs, the same place my mother once stored shoeboxes and holiday decorations. I set up my easel again in my old bedroom, painting the walls in a warm, earthy orange-brown, a shade Evelyn had always loved. I rearranged the living room to its original shape, 2 armchairs facing each other, a solid oak tea table between them, and the unfinished lace cloth she had been weaving. Small things, the oval wall clock, the glass vase with dried lavender, her charcoal portrait found their way back to their rightful places. One spring morning, I sat on the porch, sipping mint tea, the breeze brushing through my hair. The feeling wasn't fairy tale peace. It was a quieter kind, tinged with fatigue, thoughtful, but fully mine. No one in control, no one setting conditions. 3 months later, I decided to reopen the studio. not for tourists to buy paintings to hang on their walls, but as a community space, a place where people who had been hurt could come and paint. No need to be skilled, no need for a reason. I named it Hollow Tree Studio, after the tree Evelyn once described, hollowed within, yet still able to thrive if its roots remained intact. The gallery occupied the old downstairs storage room. I tore down the partitions, laid new wooden floors, set up easels, stocked oils, watercolors, charcoal, and paper. The walls carried the students' work. No names, no categories. My first group was 6 children from the local social services center. They stepped in shyly, eyes glowing with both curiosity and caution. I didn't teach technique, just how to hold a brush, thin the paint, breathe slowly to steady a circle. One girl, Mia, painted using only 2 colors, black and deep blue. I asked her what she wanted to call it. She said, "It's the dream I never dared to tell anyone." I didn't press further, I only nodded, framed it, and hung it on the wall where the afternoon sun hit. Then came Mrs. Ruth, a widow who had lost her husband in a car accident, living alone, quiet. She spent the whole session shading a blank sheet with green pencil. No shape, no subject. I let it be, because her hands no longer trembled as they had when she first arrived. I didn't call myself a teacher. I wasn't an artist anymore either. I was simply the keeper of a space where others could rediscover themselves through color. In the evenings, when the room was still again, I often sat alone, opening Evelyn's leather-bound notebook, the one I had found in the bank vault. Inside, she had jotted down everything: recipes for chamomile tea, quotes from Emily Dickinson, and memories of the afternoon I drew a squirrel on the windowsill when I was 8. At the very end, one page stood nearly blank, holding only one line. "Ella is the only one who sees the world not with her eyes but with her heart." I closed the notebook, feeling as though someone had placed a hand on my shoulder. That night, I opened my own journal, my handwriting steady now, no longer shaky from nights manipulated by guilt. I no longer need counterfeit love. I have chosen myself. The page absorbed the words like parched soil, drinking the season's first rain. Not loud, not dazzling, but enough for something to begin to sprout, quietly and steadfastly. I set the pen down, closed the journal, and sat in silence, staring at the pale light spilling through the window. Someone once asked me, if I could go back, would I choose a different path? I've thought about that question a lot. But in the end, I realized what made me strong wasn't avoiding pain, but stepping out of it with a heart still capable of love, first and foremost, love for myself. My story isn't just about my mother. It's about expectations, about manipulation dressed as family duty, and about how those things can eat away at a woman until she forgets she has her own life to live. I share this story not to condemn, but to invite you, the ones listening, to reflect on yourselves. Is there something in your life you're holding on to only because you feel you don't have the right to choose differently? Is there something you've endured in silence, fearing that speaking up would brand you as selfish? Tell me in the comments below. I want to know what you think, what you've been through. Because if we don't bring these truths into the light, stories like mine will keep unfolding in silence right inside the very homes we believe are safest. And if you felt something stir in you while hearing this, hit subscribe. Because I have more to tell. Real stories about family, choices, dignity, and the journey of reclaiming self-worth, even when it means standing up to the people we once loved most.